Our next talk is Utilizing Plant Traits from Herbarium Collections and Species Descriptions to Enhance Conservation Efforts in Southeast Asia's Biodiversity Hotspots by Alison Moore from the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew.
Good morning. My talk's a little different from the fantastic public engagement we've been hearing about. I'd like to talk to you about how we've used herbarium collections to guide our conservation approaches in the Southeast Asia team. So this is our study area, the Malaysian archipelago. The climate varies in terms of precipitation seasonality, and the islands vary in how mountainous and how isolated they are. So I'm going to talk about a couple of studies we've undertaken. The first looks at fruit traits, the influence of fruit size on the Malaysian island flora, and the second looks at flower traits alongside climate and island variations. So what did we do? We had a quite diverse team of students, curators, botanists, researchers, and external collaborators. We mined plant species descriptions for certain traits. We looked at floras, e-floras, protocols. Where we couldn't find that information, we measured the herbarium specimens themselves and gathered data from their labels for habitat and distribution information. We took species occurrence over 8 TADWAG, so standardized geographical areas. We used environmental data from World Climate, from the soils database, and the NASA's shuttle radar topography mission, which is all publicly available data for which there are links in the publications. For the second study, we looked at corolla color, at flower size, which was collected as perianth length, and we looked at the perianth to stamen length ratio as a proxy for the openness of our flowers. Again, species distribution, environmental data was taken from the same sources, and we also used island surrounding landmass proportion, SLMP, as a measure of isolation for each of our islands. And then some stats happened. We used R, and somebody in our study group really understood it very well, and that person wasn't me. So please don't ask me any questions about it. But if you are interested, it's all in quite a lot of detail in our publications. So moving on, our results. So we found that larger fruits are associated with wet, productive, lowland environments where the resources are abundant to support the energy costs of large fruit productions, and large frugivores facilitate dispersal of the fruits. Smaller fruits are more common in more mountainous and drier regions, likely due to better dispersal by wind and water, and where there is a reduced availability of those large animal dispersers at the higher elevations. So overall, we found fruit size is a significant predictor of plant distribution, but only when considered alongside environmental variations like precipitation and elevation. And this has implication for conservation. Large fruited species could be more vulnerable to defaunation, the loss of those large animal dispersers, and human encroachment and habitat loss, especially in those productive wet tropical environments. And this makes it important for the preservation of wild relatives of economically important fruit trees to prevent the diminishing of genetic resources, which will be crucial for breeding those climate-resistant crops we might need. So the preservation of those wet lowland habitats should be a priority of conservation initiatives, while further research into fruit crop domestication is carried out. So moving on to the flower study. So there was a lot more relationships to pick out of the results that we found in this study. Firstly, we can see that flower size and openness were affected by variations in different parts of the model. Flower size decreased with higher temperatures, as would be expected, and increased with larger island area, but there was no particular effect of drought, so precipitation seasonality, or isolation. On the other hand, flower openness decreased with both precipitation seasonality, so drought variation, and isolation. It wasn't clearly linked to temperature or area. The flower colour traits were somewhat mixed. As you can see, most flower colours generally increased with numbers as the temperature rose, except for red and pink, and there was a general decrease with an increase in drought variability, except for the purple and greens, which tended to show the opposite inclination. So the models performed pretty well for all the traits, and they performed pretty similarly, except that climate models better predicted flower size, island models better predicted flower openness, whilst each worked well for a number of distinct colours. So although it's a bit of a complex picture, we can conclude from this study that climate, island area, and isolation shape floral trait distributions. Conservation planning must then consider the complex interactions, which it usually does anyway. But the relationships between flower traits, climate gradients provides insight into how plant species may adapt to climate change. Strategies for vulnerable species can be developed, and by predicting the distribution of floral traits, regions with high biodiversity or unique adaptations can be prioritized for conservation, ensuring the protection of species with traits critical to ecosystem resilience. Thank you.